Thank you. My name is Norman Oliver. I'm the chair of the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Virginia. I arrived at the University of Virginia in 1998 at the time when Dr. Lewis Barnett Jr. was stepping down as chair of the department which he founded, and stayed around for another couple years before moving down to Atlanta with his lovely wife, Anna Lynn. In that brief period of time, I grew to really love and appreciate Dr. Barnett, but not nearly as much as the many alumni who spent many years working with him. He was a real giant in family medicine, a giant in medicine in general, a great teacher, loved by many, far beyond family medicine. Lewis passed away this past April, and we decided as a department that we wanted to do something to pay tribute to this great man and teacher. And we initially thought we would do something like a memorial back last spring, and then after talking to a number of alumni, realized that it would be better to wait a while to be able to involve more people in it. And this fall, we approached a number of alumni of the family medicine residency program at UVA who had trained with Lewis, and they are the ones who are really responsible for today's event. And I want to thank Kurt Elward and Andy McFarland and others here in town who helped to put this together. This is about Lewis. I won't say much more about our department or myself or anything else. I do want to introduce our speaker. Oscar Lovelace was chief resident, along with David here, in 1988, and had spent several years training with Lewis, and went on to rural South Carolina, where he has been a family physician there from ever since. And when we were thinking of doing something to pay tribute to Dr. Barnett, one of the first names that came to our mind of having someone come and talk about that was Oscar. And thankfully he agreed to come talk. Oscar is the chief partner in Lovelace Family Medicine, and beyond that, I'll let him say what he needs to say. Please welcome Dr. Lovelace.
Norm, thank you very much for this honor. For those of you who've been involved in making this happen, this is quite an occasion for all of us to celebrate an amazing life. This picture shows Dr. B in the place that most of us may remember him most vividly, in his library. Dr. B was a night owl, and so he would stay up late often and speak to us. There was many occasions, I'm sure, where we have all had the opportunity to have one of those cor ad cor loquitur moments, one heart speaking to another in Dr. B's library. So I just thought I would review a little bit. Please forgive me, but I'll just say that because there's so much that could be said, and I don't want to be the only one to reminisce this evening. A picture paints 1,000 words, so this is mostly going to be pictures that tell a great story. Dr. B was born in Woodruff. He was the only son of Lewis and Bernice, and he graduated from Woodruff High School, Furman College, the Medical University. And back then, just to let you know, he actually, if you notice there, the time span between graduating from college and med school seems to be pretty short. But at that time, students were given their college degree while they were matriculating in medical school, if they were smart enough to do so. He did his internship in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and completed that in 1950. Here he is at age 2 in 1928. So he answered the call to go back to Woodruff and served as a family physician in the back of Anderson's drugstore. And Most of you are probably aware that back then, doctors would often return to a community and they would practice inside of a drugstore when they first got there. And he did that for 4 years. Ms. Barnett let me know that he decided that he needed to act on his conviction to serve his country and volunteered to serve in the United States Navy, and was in the induction center there in Nashville, Tennessee, after 4 years of practice for 2 years. And here he is in 1955. He's almost as handsome as you were, Mike, in your naval outfit. I remember some pictures on your desk. The interesting thing about that time in his life is he received a commendation when he was in the Navy, and I didn't know this. And that was given him because he developed a policy while he was there that allowed the new recruits to wear their skivvies when they were in line getting their shots instead of standing there nude like my father told me when he joined the Navy. Dr. Barnett then, after his naval duties, returned to Woodruff and joined hands with Dr. Pearson. You know, back then, doctors had their own independent practice, but they shared this building and they shared call. And Dr. Pearson was kindly remembered by Mrs. B as being a wonderful doctor. They completed their new office in 1957, and it still stands. I took this picture last weekend when I was on call. I raced up to Woodruff. This house is important. Is this the right house, Miss B? I was told that this was the right house. In this house, in the upstairs window right here, apparently is Mrs. Reed's house, the florist in Woodruff. And this was your apartment, Annalyn. And this house was right across the street from Dr. Barnett's parents. And when Dr. Barnett first returned to Woodruff, he lived with his parents. And then he later bought a house that was right across the street from his sweetheart's first home in Woodruff. Annalyn came to Woodruff as a teacher after graduating from Winthrop in home economics. So here he is in 1958. That's pretty close to Marcus Welby, I would think. And after a brief courtship, they dated for about 6 months. They were engaged for 6 months and then married. I felt the interesting thing about this, Ms. B told me, she said, I was in for a real surprise. She said, I had no idea how hard doctors work. Our family didn't really go to doctors. We were blessed. We were relatively healthy. And she admitted that she was a little bit put off initially by the lack of companionship. But then once she realized that his calling in family medicine was his passion and it's what made him happy, she was able to deal with his time away much better. This is Lewis with young Lewis and his parents, Bernice and Lewis. And I'm assuming that's Lewis as well, Miss B. Notice how rested he looks there, early in practice. Can we hit this video there?
If I could find some of the patients that Dr. Barnett had treated. And the first patient I met here at the Woodruff Assisted Living Facility is Miss Betty Huffstetler. Now, Miss Betty, you told me you knew Dr. Barnett. How'd you know Dr. Barnett?
Oh, somebody else was going to him, and I needed a gynecologist, and that's when they recommended Dr. Barnett. He was a wonderful doctor. And I had a 9-pound baby boy, and I weighed 75 pounds, and he told me not to never come back to him no more if I got another baby, because he would send me to Dr. Holcomb.
So that was priceless, to walk into the assisted living facility in Woodruff, and honestly, I just stood in the foyer and said, did any of you all happen to know Dr. Lewis Barnett? And the lady raised her hand, and unfortunately she was in assisted living because this son that Lewis had delivered had passed away, at age 51 of colon cancer, and her husband had died. But what you didn't hear at the end because of your laughter was that he said, don't you ever come back and see me again. If you do, I will send you to Dr. Holcomb. So the fun part of this is I asked Miss Barnett, I said, was there a Dr. Holcomb? She said, yes. That was his OBGYN friend in Spartanburg. So he apparently told her that if she was going to have another 9-pound baby weighing 75 pounds, that she'd get to go see his colleague in Spartanburg. Thought that was pretty priceless. So here we are. I know. Certainly, all of us know that Lewis was a man of God, a man of faith. But one of the great things about adversity and the trials of life and like delivering 9-pound babies from 75-pound women is it makes you read the Bible more. And you can see here that was the response that Lewis here, I'm assuming they're reading the Bible there with the Advent candle. How many of you recognize that picture in the back of the man in bread? I remember that picture being in the house in Charlottesville. So Lewis did go through some difficult, challenging times. His first partner, Dr. Pearson, suffered a stroke. In the 1960s, he found himself on every night call. He then got a newer associate, Dr. Gilliland, who went to Indonesia and became a full-time medical missionary. He found himself back in solo practice again on every night call. And then Dr. Blakely joined him around the time that Ms. Barnett was really beginning to get worried about his ability to get rest. And Kristen told me that one thing they did do is Thursday night was family time. And the only way that Lewis could get away from the demands of practice was just to get out of town. At that time, there were no cell phones, and so he could truly escape. And they would often go to Pete's Backyard Steakhouse in Spartanburg. And Kristen said, Mom always made sure that we were on our best behavior on Thursday nights. And I asked Adeline, I said, how did that go? I mean, were you always, back home at 8 p.m. at night? And she said, well, no, we relaxed their bedtime a little bit on Thursday nights. So this picture I really like a lot because I think it shows me, if it influences you the same way it did me, it shows me why Dr. Barnett was always concerned about those he loved and whether they were pink. I don't think Dr. Barnett looks pink in this slide. He looks like he's pretty worn out. I was talking to Miss B, and I said, Miss B, he would often say, are you pink? And I said, I'm just kind of curious, was that time like right before he went into academics, what was that like? And she said, I was concerned about him. He was having a hard time getting away from the demands of practice, and he was often deprived of sleep. And I said, well, did he look pale? She said, he looked gray. So I say this is Dr. Barnett's gray look. It's a black and white picture, but he did receive the call to teach from Hiram Curry, the chief of family medicine, the head of the department there. Hiram started one of the first family medicine residencies in America in Charleston. And Mrs. B told me that it was a very difficult decision for him. I remember Dr. Barnett telling me that Hiram just kept calling him and kept calling him. I think he was a year ahead of him in medical school. And he insisted that Lewis leave his practice and join him in academics. And apparently when Lewis first got there, Hiram thought so much of Lewis, having practiced about 20 years before he went into academics, that he wanted Lewis just to teach. But Lewis refused. He said, I've got to see patients. I know many of us have heard that, little adage that he would say, the magic that happens behind the exam room door was something that he thrived on. And he became vice chair of family medicine at MUSC in 1970. Then Dr. Norman Knorr recruited him to the University of Virginia in 1977. I called Dean Robert Carey, who was dean of the med school when I was here, and I asked Dean Carey, I said, did you recruit Dr. Barnett? He said, I did. I can't claim that. I would love to be able to claim that, but we did work very closely together. But Dr. Knorr was the psychiatrist dean of UVA who recruited Dr. Barnett to be the first, as I understand it, endowed professor of family medicine in America, the William M. Seward Chair of Family Medicine here at the University of Virginia. And I asked Dean Carey, I said, how was it that we were allowed, when I was here, to supervise interns in medicine as a second year, as a second year resident? How was it that we were allowed to supervise interns in medicine? And he said, well, Dr. Barnett wanted you all to have real responsibility. And we told Dean Carey said, I told him that we will give you incremental responsibility as the residents meet that demand. And I know, looking back on my training, the rigorous internal medicine training and that time I spent in the neonatal intensive care unit was very, very important to my training as a rural family physician. So here's a picture of a handsome family outside of the SuCasa. And of course, the only part that's missing for those of us who are residents are some shots of us playing basketball and volleyball and having a lot of fall outdoor or even spring outdoor sports late into the afternoon and evening at Dr. Barnett's home on Sunday afternoons. So I'm just going to take a little detour quickly and talk to you just briefly about what this training has meant to me as a family physician. When I would park my car, I'm getting my '69 Camaro remodeled now, but when I would park my old Camaro and I would walk through this gate, it just always made me feel a greater sense of duty and responsibility. Enter by this gateway and seek the way of honor, the light of truth, and the will to work for men. You know, it'd be one thing to have that inscription above a gateway, but it's a whole nother matter to see it lived out through your attendings, especially through your chairman. So here's some of the attendings that were that trained me. There's Steve and Dottie Mikesell, of course, Dr. and Mrs. B, and Francie and Mike Morse. And I thought I would just share a story. Steve and Mike Coates, of course, were residents of Lewis's at MUSC. And they both told very powerful stories that I'm just going to share with you. So this is Steve. The event occurred in the winter of 1986. Dottie's father had just died of a heart attack. We were planning to fly from Virginia to New Jersey for the funeral. A week earlier, we had adopted our youngest daughter. She was less than a year old. However, our daughter developed a fever. Our family physician, Mike Coates, diagnosed an ear infection. When Lewis learned of our situation and that we had to drive to New Jersey because we could not fly due to our daughter's ear infection, he immediately said, "Take my Cadillac. It has leather seats in it, and they're easy to clean up if she gets sick." This incredible team of teachers, assembled by Dr. Barnett, taught us all so well. So Steve writes, "I was hesitant, but Lewis would not take no for an answer. So he drove our small Datsun 210 station wagon, and we drove his fancy car. In fact, I did not know that headlights came on automatically when it became dark, and the gas cap release was in the glove compartment. Lewis said that it was an experience driving our little Datsun. The event was so typical of Lewis. He was keenly aware of people's needs and always willing to listen, love, and help whenever and wherever he could, even in the smallest of ways." So this is a picture outside my office. It's a beautiful old barn, probably been there since the 1800s, on a rare snowy day in South Carolina. And I just thought I would tell you briefly, when I came to UVA, there were apparently 600 applicants for 6 spots, and the department was going to interview 100 people. I wasn't very keen on how I might stack up in that. I considered a great blessing to have been chosen to attend the University of Virginia Family Medicine residency, especially after I made a phone call to Dr. Barnett, because Dr. Barnett was not here when I came to interview. And at that particular time, we had a 3-month-old son, and we drove from Charleston about 8 hours. It was a little rough. And so after I got here and was just amazed by the program, really wanted to come here, I said, God, Mary, I didn't even get to meet Dr. Barnett. And Mary said, well, you want to go back up and meet him? And I said, well, they had 600 applicants. They interviewed 100 people. I'm not in AOA. I don't know, And so I said, I'm going to call him. I'm going to try to call him and talk to him. So I got through, and he came to the phone. I said, Dr. Barnett, I'm Oscar Lovelace, and I've heard a lot about you. I'm from South Carolina. I'm down here in Charleston, where you went to med school, and came up to interview, and you weren't there. I hope I'm competitive, and I'd like to try to. I really would like to be a resident at UVA. Really would. But I understand, Dr. Barnett, because you had 600 applicants, didn't you? Only had like 100 people you're interviewing, and you think it'd be worth my while to come back up to Charlottesville? He said, well, we don't typically recruit quitters. So I said, when do I need to come to Charlottesville? This is a picture of one of my favorite patients, Clarabelle Sheely. She taught me that pernicious anemia, when your hemoglobin is 6 and your MCV is 136, causes atrophic gastritis and GI bleeding and all kinds of other virgin disease that Clara taught me with her common-law husband, Roy, in the background. And I could tell some really fun stories about Clara and how she lifted my spirits on many, many occasions. But I'm going to share with you a story that my first associate, who joined me from the University of Virginia and is now a full-time teacher, and I guess he's a Christian counselor, theologian, who after 8 years of practice told me when we were asked to start the state's first rural residency training track that he had been called to the ministry. So Mike Emlett wrote this story about Dr. Barnett. I was a third-year resident on call for the weekend and was notified by the ER attending that a patient was on his way to be seen by family medicine. The person identified himself as a patient of Dr. Barnett's. Although Dr. B had not seen this man, only his wife, suffice it to say that this gentleman was one of the most wealthy men in America. I well remember the ER physician's incredulous comment, and he says he's a family medicine patient. I called Dr. B immediately, who was sure, I was sure he would want to come and see this gentleman, as he was a VIP. Instead, he expressed his confidence in me that I would evaluate the patient skillfully and would call him with my assessment and plan. It was the only time I've ever evaluated a patient with armed bodyguards standing outside the room. This experience showed me several things. Dr. B trusted his residents as true colleagues. He was confident because we were the recipients of the best training we could hope for in family medicine. He knew us as physicians and friends. 2, Dr. B was no respecter of persons, meaning that he did not show favoritism and was not swayed by cultural standards of what is to be valued and applauded. Dr. B gave the same skillful, humble care to the poorest and to the richest. So what I learned in my 3-year residency, which I would say was the steepest learning curve of my life, we had 2 of our children here. I hopefully learned how to be a father. I remember Dr. Barnett telling me that he learned how to be a family physician by going to Woodruff and getting a bunch of families and he learned how to be a family doctor by getting a bunch of families and starting to doctor on them. And I guess I learned how to be a father by Mary blessing us with a family and being a dad. But what I really recall about the role modeling, the cor ad cor loquitur, those late night conferences in Dr. Barnett's study was he taught me about family medicine. And I had cause to think about this when we celebrated his 20th anniversary here, and there was a program in the Rotunda. I'm doing a little bit better because I've had a little bit more sleep than I did that night. I couldn't really keep it together very well. But we were talking about faith, family, and family medicine, those things that were so important to Dr. Barnett. And I remember being on my lawnmower as I was putting my thoughts together and remembered some Latin that the word familus is actually the Latin word for servant. And the word medicine comes from the Greek word medicina, which means healing. So family medicine is servant healing. That's exactly what we were trained to do. We were broadly trained. We could go to a community. We could do what was needed. So when I speak to medical students on occasion, this is one of the most common slides I use, that family medicine is community medicine, and that ensuring access to primary care physicians, particularly those broadly trained family doctors in rural areas, will do more to address access, cost, quality, and disparities than any other single healthcare system reform. And I'd like to share a little bit about how that's happened in my little neck of the woods. Well, we know that there's a lot of talk about a healthcare crisis, and most of the discussions are about how we're getting older, and those demographics are turning upside down on us. But actually, the fiscal problem is not the demographics. It's the rising cost per beneficiary, not the number or type of those people on Medicare and Medicaid, according to the Congressional Budget Office Director. So I've been involved after we started the practice in 1988. I was in solo practice for 2 years. The second year of solo practice, by the grace of God, I was able to deliver 220 babies and our 4th child. 90% of our patients were Medicaid patients, and so I became very acquainted with Medicaid in South Carolina. You can see what's happened to Medicaid in South Carolina over the years. There are nearly 1/4 of the population is now on Medicaid, 1 million people. It covers about 40% of all children and is the coverage of 60% of all births. Because of the involvement that I'd had with Medicaid, I sat on a committee in 1992 to develop something called the Physicians Enhanced Plan. And it was basically a voluntary program linking primary care providers to Medicaid patients. And that primary care provider received a monthly capitated payment based on the patient's age and gender. Well, that primary care provider had to, for that capitated payment, provide an array of primary care services, not repair of a chainsaw laceration, but just the typical primary care services. They would authorize specialty care, hospital care, or provide that hospital care as we do, family support services, and other ancillary services. Essentially, that primary care physician had to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for emergency coverage and be available by phone. The long and short is they had to be a family doctor, a medical home, which of course now has been coined as a patient-centered medical home. So you can see here what happened. I came back to our practice. We at that time had, I think, about 6 or 7 physicians practicing in a little rural prosperity. And the program was implemented there, you can see here in August of 1996. And what happened was it was like turning off the faucet to the emergency room. Our patients just stopped going. We gave them a letter smogged down to the 3rd grade reading level, said these are reasons to go to the emergency room, these are reasons to call us first. And our Medicaid patients showed us that all the common assumptions were wrong. They were educable and they were respectful of our time. Here's what happened when we came to Newberry, and as I mentioned, when I came to Newberry, there were 2 OBGYNs. I didn't tell this part. There were 2 OBGYNs, and no sooner had I signed on the dotted line for building the new building, one of the OBGYNs left, and the second year, the other OBGYN died suddenly, and I became the only doctor delivering babies in 3 counties in South Carolina. But that was in 1990. And then what happened, as you can see, is as time went on, we were able to get more help, and this is data based on residence criteria. And you can see that the green line there at the top is South Carolina Black and other infant mortality, and the blue line is South Carolina white infant mortality. The broken orange line is Newberry County white infant mortality. And the broken red line here, there we go, is Newberry County Black and other infant mortality. And this data is by residence, meaning the patient resides in Newberry, but may deliver anywhere else. And this is tracking the outcome of that delivery. And this was not something that we came up with. This is from the State Department of Health and Environmental Control. This is what a group of University of Virginia trained family physicians did in Newberry County. Dr. Evans, Dr. Bernardo, Dr. Emlett, Dr. Ball, all trained at the University of Virginia. And during a time when we were all practicing in prosperity, you can see that Newberry County's infant mortality, the Newberry County's infant mortality dropped precipitously, and Newberry County Hospital infant mortality, basically when we completed a C-section training program and were the only doctors in the county during that period, that three-year period, only family doctors delivering babies in a rural county that had been trained to do operative obstetrics were able to lower our infant mortality to 0. So as it is, you can see that by that previous graph, we were able to lower Newberry County's Black infant mortality below white infant mortality. And even today, our infant mortality in Newberry County, a rural county, is lower than the state average, and our primary C-section rate is around 7%. This is one of my favorite slides. How many times have you all been with Dr. B and seen him assume that posture? Where he's pointing the way for us. And I wanted to share this story that Mike Coates wrote and had been shared with Kurt Elward. I remember a very special moment while visiting Lewis in August of 2014, which also happened to be the last time we had time together in his home. He was in his office and navigating quite smoothly with his walker. On his desk was a list of many people's names, many of whom I recognized over the 40 years of knowing Lewis. I asked him what this was, and he said, "It's my prayer list." Many individuals say they'll pray for you out of a perfunctory response, or it just sounds good. But Lewis really meant it. He prayed for so many on a daily basis. He would check the name. And as many of you know, his memory for names and details was quite formidable. So I was talking to Kristen, and I said, Kristen, what in the world was it like with a dad who was looking out for so many? And she said, you know, I was always aware of the importance and passion for his work, but I felt assured of the priority he placed on our family, in me particular. I thought that was a good picture of you, Kristen. And this recollection from his son, Lewis. I remember Dad talking about how he liked to set his eyes on his residents on a regular basis to see if they were pink. His way of saying that they had some color in their cheeks and seemed to be holding up okay. I had hit a rough patch in my graduate studies, and he had worked this out from our weekly phone conversations. He took time off, flew me into Asheville for a guy's weekend at the Mountain House. He was going through things himself right about then. His mother was failing. He wanted to set eyes on me, see if I was pink. We sat out on the deck of the house, watching the clouds over the mountains. Talked about my situation and how I might navigate it. He didn't know a thing about graduate study and computer science. I really don't remember a specific single thing he said that weekend, but you know how he understood people. And through his gentle encouragement, he lent me some of his strength to pull through a tough time. I know many will speak and relate similar stories of his empathy and support. It was something he lived every day, not just for his family, but for everyone around him. And it's one of the things I admire most about him. What a great family picture. I think that's all the children and grandchildren, right, Miss B? That's everybody? A little younger, but that's everybody. So this is the best of all in the end of my remarks. Thank you, Dr. and Miss B, for keeping us pink, teaching us about one heart speaking to another. And Dr. Barnett, thank you for telling me on more than one occasion that you do not believe in retreats. Did any of you ever hear that? He never would go on a retreat because he said, that makes you sound like you're pulling back, and we want to press forward. You didn't like that word. You made sure we were well equipped and showed us how to press on to a higher call and lead as servant healers to be a human splint for fractured lives. Thank you very much.